It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in the control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day, listeners, and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. It's episode 79, and there's so much going on at the moment. US presidential debate wash-up. The SCOTUS has ruled the Trumpster may be spared any form of prosecution because he was acting as president at the time. And meanwhile, in Australia, the Labor Party is falling apart a bit at the seams here over Fatima Payman, the Western Australian senator. So we got a lot to cover. And joining me this week, as usual, is Hong Kong Jack. G'day, mate. How are you?
I'm excellent.
How are things in Hong Kong? Don't tell me you've just had another public holiday.
We have indeed. The 1st of July each year is a public holiday to celebrate the formation of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region on the 1st of July 1997, the handover, as it was called. That's what it was called. So I spent my day, it was very quiet here. My wife's in Sydney. Spent my day looking at social media. And have you ever seen any of these TikTok cooking videos?
Mate, come on. No.
No, the worst one I saw was a woman who was making mashed potatoes out of a can of Pringles, which was pretty bad.
I do catch a lot of this stuff on Instagram. I'm not a TikTok user, but the American recipes are almost always just pour it into a large one of those aluminium foil tubs. Yeah. And throw a bit of cheese on, always cheese. That is arguably America's greatest contribution to the history of Western civilization, mate. What they do in America with liquid cheese is years ahead of the rest of us.
Well, the one I saw yesterday was a bit different in the sense
that someone was a dog.
Someone was making mayonnaise, and they didn't do it quite correctly. They just whacked the raw egg, the olive oil, and making aioli, in fact, because they threw a clove of garlic in there, and then just used a stick blender to mix it up. Really, yeah. What you should do is beat the egg first and then add the oil.
And then add the oil slowly while stirring, yes.
Right. But that was sort of amusing enough, but it was the responses that really got me. You know, how do I unsee this? Are you really serious? Is this how you make mayonnaise? And I don't want to eat mayonnaise anymore. Really? Mayonnaise is just oil and egg, and people were astonished at this. So
it was a miracle of TikTok. Yeah. Look, I often look at the American recipes that pop up on my Instagram, and a lot of it is TikTok stuff, and you just think, I'm not eating that. I wouldn't eat that with someone else's digestive system. It almost always involves breaking up potato chips and bacon and cheese, and you can make up the rest of the ingredients there. No wonder they're all so fat, Jack, over there. But we've got to start locally, of course, Jack. Fatima Payman, Labor Senator from Western Australia, has been given her marching orders from the caucus. She was on media yesterday saying that all her group chats were down, all the WhatsApp stuff and Signal stuff that they do. She'd been omitted from, and this, of course, is due to her support and crossing the floor in regard to a motion that was put in the Senate by the Greens, I believe, wasn't it, Jack?
I think it was. I can't recall whether it was a Labor motion with an amendment by the Greens or the other way around. But in any event, the caucus had met and decided on a position, and she voted against the caucus position. That's why she's been suspended.
Well, yeah, there's an old Labor salt, Jack. Tell me, the Liberals have a view that you can cross the floor any time. and nothing really bad will happen to you. But the form of Labor is that if you go against the wishes of the caucus, of the collective, then that's you done, isn't it? That's basically you will be excluded from the caucus. You actually be expelled from the party.
You can be. Generally, people are suspended. It's happened only rarely. From recollection, I think it was the bloke from Kalgoorlie, George Campbell,
yes,
who was suspended a couple of times and then left and went and sat as an independent. And Senator Georges, I think, opposed the deregistration of the Builders Labourers Federation, and he too was suspended.
There's a move that history really hasn't supported over the years, Jack. The old Victorian BLF.
I must confess that the firm I was working with acted for the Builders Labourers Federation in those days. They were fabulous clients, or they would be if they paid their bills. But we went to the High Court 6 times, I think, in a single year for the BLF.
Storm and Norman Gallagher times, Jack.
Well, I sat in court. I was doing the afternoon shifts as instructing solicitor during his criminal trial, as a matter of fact.
Yes, he did end up in the slammer for a year or so, didn't he? He had a lovely holiday house, though, down Inverloch way, I believe, wasn't it?
No, it was further along in a kind of swamp. It was, a mate of mine described it at the time as like buying a ski resort in Ayers Rock. It was one of those places where the sandflies are as big as 50-cent pieces, and there's a lot of them, and not much else.
Oh, gee, you want to be a very hungry sandfly to have a nibble on old Norm Gallagher, mate.
Yeah.
But look, what happens now? Look, I watched 7:30 last night. It had actually a really interesting insight to this. There were some interviews with a number of prominent lawyers and other political types who are saying that in Western Sydney there are candidates ready to go as independents to run against the Labor candidates. And there is a real prospect of a kind of, I don't know what colour we would attach to it, Jack, but a sort of teal type revival in Labor heartland in Western Sydney that could cost them a seat or two.
Well, there's a bit of a disconnect between the Labor parliamentarians and some of their past supporters. That's the trouble.
Well, firstly, I mean, let's acknowledge that Senator Payman, has acted on her own conscience, and that's fair enough. But she's a senator. Let's get that out there. So she's actually not. She owes the Labor Party her position, essentially.
I think she got 1,200 primary votes.
Yeah. So there's that. I mean, and again, she's acted according to her conscience, and that's fine. But she needs to understand the rules, doesn't she?
You're perfectly okay to act in accordance with your conscience, but you've got to understand that there may be consequences for that.
And the consequences are she will be suspended from caucus until such a time, I believe there is no time limit on this, until such a time as she is prepared to act according to the wishes of the caucus.
And that the leadership is satisfied that is genuine, and she will.
Yeah. So what does she do, Jack? Should she clamber onto the lunatic fringe of crossbenchers in the Senate? It's an absolute circus there anyway now.
Yes, it sort of reminds me of the cantina in Star Wars a little bit. The crossbenchers,
a little bit like that. You want to be very careful who you're sitting next to on the crossbenchers there, and of course the Greens are exacerbating these by continuing to put forward motions that will test her conscience, presumably. Yes. And they're making much out of this. I went back. I did the exercise because Sarah Ferguson was interviewing Adam Bant, And it was quite a combative interview. I don't know if you watched it, but quite a combative interview, and he got a little bit frustrated. But I went back and did the exercise of finding out what Adam Bandt said in the days after the October 7 attacks. Is that particularly relevant, knowing what we did, knowing what we know now about Israel's attack on Gaza? Well, yeah, absolutely it is, I think. And there was not a word from Adam Bandt's office. Not a press release, not a condemnation. They said that they condemned it, but I can find no sign of it. And there was a motion put forward about a month later in the Senate, Jack, that did seek to condemn Hamas, and the Greens voted against it.
Yeah, well, that's because the Greens are essentially anti-West, and they see Israel as part of the West.
Oh, I think that's an oversimplification. I think that the history of the Australian Greens, particularly in New South Wales, is a vehement support for Palestine. Well, a vehement support for Palestinian people in the Levant, and it's almost it's an incredible blind spot that they have there.
Well, the Victorian Greens are really the remnants of the old Victorian Socialist left, my old faction, in fact. And
that's true, but they're even crazier in New South Wales.
Well, in New South Wales, they're about 30% are the remnants of the old Communist Party.
Yes and no. I mean, they a lot of
not
them
all,
came.
about a third are Lee Rhiannon and her pals. Who came out of the Communist Party. But in Victoria, it's the crazy part of the old socialist left, and they were essentially anti-West.
So they're anyway the Greens,
which I might add, both of those positions are perfectly valid political positions to hold.
And well said. Yeah. Absolutely, and well said. I mean, I was just going to go on and say that you mentioned a third of the Greens, perhaps the other 2/3 cut their teeth in politics around what we might call community activism, opposition to roads being built in small, in suburban areas and those sorts of things, and rose up through the Greens that way. These are perfectly legitimate positions to have, but there is a real sense that Senator Payman, in fact, Bandt was asked this last night, don't you feel like you're putting far too much pressure on Senator Payman? He goes, well, Labor's putting pressure on her. Well, they are. There's no doubt about that, but they're doing that by exclusion. I mean, I did see she had a hug with Tanya Plibersek yesterday.
The Labor Party is simply saying, we have rules, these are the rules, these are the consequences. And the Greens are saying, gee, here's an opportunity to drive a wedge within Labor Party and between Labor and some of its supporters. So we'll take the opportunity to drive that wedge. And that's perfectly reasonable politics.
And did Anthony Albanese move too slowly, Jack? There was a sense there that he dithered for a little while before, but I believe that he had a conversation with her as early as last Wednesday, and we're recording this on Tuesday, the 2nd of July, where he advised her at that stage that she was excluded from the caucus.
He's looked clumsy, but he's looked clumsy about a lot of things lately, in my view. He looks a little bit weak. I've got to say, which is a bad thing for a prime minister, and not good for the country. I've got to say that whilst I think the views of the Greens are legitimate, they're kind of self-limiting because you can never get to government with those views because they are very much minority views.
But the broader political issue, Jack, there's two elements to it, and I'm talking now about strictly electoral politics. Are we going to see, I mean, what we've seen historically is that the Greens voters will preference Labor pretty much 85-15. So there's a very, very strong dominance there. And I'm wondering now that we may not see that that we may not see that really strong preference flow at the next federal election because the Greens and Labor are at each other's throats at the moment. And I'm wondering too if we look at dissatisfaction among without wanting to caricature this, among Arab Australians and in multicultural areas like Western Sydney, putting up their own candidates, saying running as independents. There's a potential there for a real disaster for Labor.
Well, there's a potential for the same kind of disconnect on different issues that has happened to the Liberal national parties, Liberal Party in particular. And the Liberal Party no longer gets the same automatic flow of preferences from the other Conservative parties that it used to get. And in the same way, Labor might find that they're getting the same things happening with the Greens, as you suggest.
And all of this happening in a period where the two major parties are declining in terms of their ability to attract primary votes, and that it sits around 70%. And sometimes a little higher than that, sometimes a little lower than that in state and federal elections in recent times. But we don't need to go back too far. Gee whiz, if you looked at something like 1977, for example, 1980, the two major parties were getting 90% of the vote. So that there is a very strong trend away from the two major parties.
Yeah, the politics of Australia wasn't that different. The difference was that the outlier factions, if you like, were within the Labor Party and within the Liberal Party rather than separate entities. So, all of the weirdest of the Victorian Greens were in the socialist left in the Labor Party, pretty much. And that's why it looked like that. But in fact, so the battles took place, and some rip-roaring battles took place at things like state conferences and within and in branches within the Labor Party.
Well, this takes us to Newspoll, Jack, published on Monday, published yesterday as we record this. Labor, the headline figure is that Labor's taken a 51-49 lead. It was the previous news poll had them 50-50. I did notice some rounding there, Jack. I'd actually put some rounding that probably disadvantaged Labor in this news poll. So I'd probably have them about 51.5 to 48.5, which is where we were. Which is where we were 2 years ago, mate.
Yes, exactly.
Not a lot has changed.
No, things have changed. That's where we were at the election. Then the Liberal Party
have changed.
Yeah, but the numbers have changed since then. That's where we were at the election. By the time of the Aston by-election, when after the Scott Morrison revelations, etc., the Liberals were much worse off. Now they've climbed back, but they've only got back to where they were at the last election.
Only got back to where they were. No, that's quite right. Look, we'll talk about the nuclear polling in a minute, but the other thing that we haven't seen, and this must be something that the Senator Payman brouhaha causes. I mean, I imagine there'll be some quite bad language being used because the government needed some clear air around July 1 tax cuts, etc., and the other boosts to the economy. They copped a bit of a bit of bad news in terms of the inflation rate in the country. Annualised, though, it was not very much, so it's not anything you'd really want to hang your hat on. But they do still have this inflation issue, and they needed to bed down this idea that people are going to have more money to spend from their tax cuts. And I've been saying for a while that when we look at polling, we shouldn't pay too much attention to it until these tax cuts are bedded down in about a month or so.
I think that's right. The inflation numbers aren't dire, but I think the government...
Well, last month was going the wrong way, put it that way.
The government was kind of thinking they would get an interest rate cut pretty soon, but that looks very unlikely.
it looks unlikely for the next couple of months at least now, like I say, so we'll see how these tax cuts bed down in the community, and then we'll get a better view of where the government lies.
Yes,
probably
we will.
by September, October.
Now, I was a bit surprised by the nuclear polling, I've got to say. What, 42,
I
45?
I wasn't too surprised. I've seen some other polling that's a lot less than that 42% figure that supports it. 42 for, 45 against, with a large number of don't knows. And pretty much drawn on party lines. So profound support for nuclear among the coalition, among coalition voters, and not much for the Labor people or the Greens folk.
23% of Labor is still significant, and that surprised me as well. 23% of Labor people who were
that means you at least got 60% opposed.
Yeah, that's right. But it's a bigger figure than I was expecting.
Yeah. I honestly think, and I did see Chris Mitchell's column yesterday, where he's not making a call yet, but he did use the possibility of it falling flat, expressing it as the longest suicide note, Peter Dutton's longest suicide note. But he hasn't made his mind up about it. And, of course, we're needing a lot more. As it stands, if you do the maths on and we don't, the maths is almost impossible to do because they haven't said what's going to be a large-scale nuclear reactor. Are there going to be multiple reactors in some of these SMRs? And we don't really know. Yes, they say they're going to be multiple reactors and all that sort of stuff. As it stands, even on the most conservative estimates, we are talking about a spend somewhere around $60 billion, and that's on their numbers, not the CSIRO's, but their numbers, $60 billion to provide 4% to the grid, Jack.
Yeah.
So when people start looking at that, they're going to make better judgments, I think.
Yeah. As regards the politics of it and how the government's going generally, it might be time for a reshuffle. I'd be getting Bowen out of his portfolio. He's going very poorly indeed, in my view.
I'm not entirely sure I agree with that. It's a difficult portfolio. I've never seen him struggle. I've never seen him struggle with detail. He seems to be across detail a lot. I mean, if we compared him to Andrew Giles, for example, who's not a member of the cabinet, but immigration minister nevertheless, you'd say, well, he's one who's got to go because he's not across his brief and continues to make poor judgments. Now, we could argue about whether Chris Bowen is pursuing a policy that is for Australia's benefit or not, but at least he's across his brief.
Yeah, no, it looks weak and unconvincing to me.
Well, he is an unfortunate-looking man, Jack, and I have referred to him previously as maintaining the appearance of rat-faced politicians in Australian politics. There's been quite a few during the journey, and he's just one of them. He's an unfortunate-looking man, but I've met him on a couple of occasions. He's quite a pleasant fellow.
Yeah, no, he worked quite closely with a good pal of ours for a long time, and I think he's a nice fella. But I just think he's not perhaps this portfolio doesn't suit him. Do you think he looks a bit like Billy Hughes?
The great story about Billy Hughes, Jack, is when the federal parliament opened for the first time in Melbourne, at the Melbourne Parliament, and the Victorian Parliament was all shuffled off to the exhibition buildings.
It was.
And Hughes, like a few others, were unusual in that they were Hughes was at the time a member of the New South Wales Parliament and also a member of the federal Parliament. For a period of about 6 months, he was both. And on the day of the opening of the federal Parliament, he walked up the stairs there, and there was quite a crowd down Burke Street and along Spring Street to see what was a major historical event in Australia, the opening of the first federal Parliament. And Hughes shuffled forward, and because he was a longshoreman originally, he was a docker, and a pretty unprepossessing sort of bloke. And he marched up the stairs expecting an entrance, and a sergeant, Victorian copper, said, "Where do you think you're going?" He goes, "I'm a member of Parliament." He goes, "Go around the back." And so poor old Billy had to go around the back. He wasn't quite sure whether a man of that sort of diminutive stature and rather affronting to look at should be wandering into the Parliament through the front door. Meanwhile, Jack, Julian Assange, he's gone to ground. He's probably doing what anyone in his position would be doing, and having a month in Hayman Island and eating good food and sleeping in lovely cotton sheets and that sort of stuff. That's what you would expect normal people to do, and he's done just that. I did see an amusing take from, I think he'd be someone you'd follow fairly carefully, Jack, Mitch Beer.
Yeah, he's a trainer from, he was originally from Albury, but he's moved to Kembla Grange. But his comment was good. Anyone prepared to fly halfway around the world with Kevin Rudd deserves their freedom.
There you go. Was it a good look? Alexander Downer wrote in the Australian yesterday that it wasn't for Assange to be getting around on a RAAF burner from Saipan to Australia, and I have to say the media coverage is very strange. The ABC was following the plane in the air and all this sort of stuff. It was almost like the arrival of Elvis Presley or Lyndon Johnson or the Beatles, Jack.
Or Taylor Swift.
Yeah. My view is that this was probably arranged. I guess there was some politics. It most definitely was. This sort of bit of triumphalism around the politics with Rudd and Stephen Smith, Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong and others expecting a good news story. I think it was a good achievement. But when people talk about him not being made a passenger on an RAAF burner, I don't think there are too many other solutions. He could have caught a commercial flight from Saipan to Tokyo, maybe. And does he have any problems with the Japanese? I mean, if he wandered into any number of countries, Jack, he might have been arrested again. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, I've got no problem with them bringing him home. The error, I thought, was the Prime Minister's by doing a lap of honour with Julian Assange to the extent that he's sort of allied himself with a bloke who, to be kind, is a controversial figure, right? Albo could have just said, the Prime Minister could have said, look, I understand Mr. Assange is a controversial figure, and I've got no view about, we as a government don't have a view about what he's done, but he's an Australian citizen, and diplomacy works better sometimes when it's not done in public, and we've done what we can to ensure an Australian citizen gets home. End of story. That's it. No further comment.
Well, I think he did that.
No, but then it was too self-congratulatory, and the risk with that is that you say, I've saved Julian Assange. Well, it's most of the population won't think.
I don't think he said that. I mean, what you said in your answer before was pretty much what Albo said. He said, look, you may not like this man or his politics, but it had gone on too long, and we brought him home.
Yeah, and what about the photo op? The photo op with Albo on the phone talking to him, absolutely silly.
Yeah, that might have been a bit of a mistake, but the call was made by Assange, not by Albanese.
But the photo was taken in Albo's office.
Yeah.
And the call didn't have to be accepted.
Look, we can speculate on what Assange might do. There's certainly a view among some of the right-wing fringe parties, Jack, including the Libertarian Party in New South Wales, that he might become their leader one day. I don't know how.
Dear idea. Are they not going badly enough already?
There was a tweet there from John Ruddock saying, he'll be Prime Minister of Australia in 2029 and leader of the Libertarian Party. At this stage, we don't know what he's going to do. And I suspect Assange is sitting back going, well, I'm 52. What do I do with the rest of my life?
That's the worry for the government. If you align yourself with him, no one knows what, at least probably not including him, what he's going to do. If he does something really silly, then you've tied yourself to a silly person. Not a good plan.
Yeah, I'm not so sure. I've heard a lot of this sort of stuff from the usual suspects about the politics around it. I think this stuff sort of dies fairly quickly, Julian Assange is not a topic of conversation. Besides, on this podcast, it's just not a topic of conversation in the body politic at the moment. It sort of came and gone. But there may well be. I'm sure Julian Assange, from what I know of him, will stick his head up above the parapet at some point.
Yeah, he's quite capable of making himself a topic of conversation again. That's the risk, is that you tie himself to you now and you don't know what you're tying yourself to.
All right, over to the United States, Jack, and breaking news is the Supreme Court has ruled that a president, and I quote, may not be prosecuted. I guess that's the key word, may not be prosecuted for exercising his, not looking at a woman president anytime, for exercising his core constitutional powers, and he is entitled, at a minimum, to a presumptive immunity from prosecution for all his official acts. This is what Chief Justice John Roberts wrote for the court, joined in whole or part by Justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. The court on its own threw out parts of the prosecution's case against Trump, and that's the 4-count indictment in DC, including on his alleged efforts to use the Justice Department to advance his unsubstantiated claims of election fraud and submit slates of false electors to replace those President Biden won. I don't know how that affects. There's a huge prosecution going on in Arizona over just that. That doesn't involve Trump, but a number of Trump's associates have been charged, including Rudy Giuliani. I don't know where that now ends, but the 4-count indictment, the DC indictment, that has been sent back to a lower court to determine if the charges will persist, Jack.
Yeah, that's because the Supreme Court decided that the lower court hadn't turned its mind to whether the conduct was official actions or unofficial actions, private actions.
I thought it was fairly obvious that it wasn't, Jack.
Because of that, they didn't have any, because the Supreme Court doesn't take evidence. The Supreme Court's a court of appeal. So they weren't in a position to make that determination. So it's sent back there for that to happen. But the last time someone sought presidential immunity was when Paula Jones sued Bill Clinton, and he went to the Supreme Court in the United States and argued that he had immunity as the president. And the Supreme Court threw that out because the actions took place before he was president, and said, no, you don't have immunity. You have immunity for what you do while you're in office as an official action. So this is not really new, but you don't have an immunity against all prosecutions.
All right. So where does that leave the role of the president? It's been hotly debated really since the Watergate era, where a number of people on the hard right of the Republican Party believed that Nixon should never have been subject to any sort of criminal charge. Ultimately, he wasn't. He was pardoned, of course, Jack. And he resigned before the Senate convicted him. But where does it leave the role of the president? It seems like we're looking at someone from Gabon or from Equatorial Guinea now. Do whatever you like.
No, I wouldn't say it that way. I'm not always in favour of the immunities, which are sprinkled round the system a little bit. Judges get them, prosecutors get them. This is only for, what the court said is it's for official acts. Do you have immunity? And that's to prevent people using the justice system to unduly influence that arm of government, the executive.
I was doing some reading, Jack, around the establishment of the United States and the constitutional forefathers, and I was reading a fair bit about the Constitutional Convention, 1787, which had to be delayed a few days because no one turned up for a little while. And while they were in heated debate about what they were going to do, Benjamin Franklin emerged from the room and said, "We have a republic for now." And he stressed the "for now." It's really important to look at that, to look at the very early days and the creation of the US Constitution and the philosophical and ideological underpinnings behind it. If we listen to the accepted history of the United States, it's the largest democracy, not the largest democracy, but the oldest democracy, all of this sort of stuff. The Constitutional Convention, they didn't care much about democracy. They cared more about the establishment of a republic and not creating a system of a sort of aristocracy or elites that would control power. And so the democratic stuff, they sort of knew. I mean, they were still dealing with abolition issues, even in 1787, around slavery, which they roughly ignored because many of the men who penned the Constitution were, of course, slave owners. And they knew that there was no such a thing as universal suffrage. There was the only people who could vote there were 21 years of age, male, and landowners in their first elections. So important to remember that. Not requesting a comment from you, Jack, but it's just, this was the priority of the constitutional forefathers, to create a republic, not necessarily a democratic one.
Yep, that's anyone who's read much of American history should understand that. There are all sorts of reasons why they didn't address slavery, but the main one was that it wouldn't have been possible to put together the 13 states if they had.
Yeah. And of course, they kicked that can down the road for another, 80 years, and no less than 80 years, until a terrible, terrible conflict occurred in the country. All right. Now, of course, the debate, Jack.
So my take on this is that the Supreme Court, they're like our High Court. They can be mistaken, but they can never be wrong, because there's no right of appeal to go beyond them.
No.
But this is not the. I don't think I've read of it this morning or last night when it was handed out. This is not the controversial decision that some people are making.
I think it is. Yeah, I think you're right in that respect. But it will. Well, how does it work politically, Jack? Is it something that's going to pump the Democrats up because they certainly need a pump up at the moment? We'll get to the debate in a minute.
I don't think it'll make much difference at all.
We shall see. We'll just see the sort of numbers of people who respond to this, protests and so forth, and we'll just see how that all pans out. But, of course, the debate that took place in Georgia and Atlanta last week, CNN sponsored, CNN organised thing, and I suspect it was they did most of their organising with the Democrats. So it was very much.
It drew a crowd. It was. I think it topped out at over 50 million.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So yeah. Look, I hadn't actually looked at viewer numbers. I wrote a column, and I'm not patting myself on the back, but my column was filed 20 minutes after the debate had concluded, and I stayed away from social media because I didn't want to be influenced. I just wanted to see how it all went. And the only thing that I watched online was betting markets. And we'll get to those in a little while because the betting markets were really, really interesting. But, of course, it was a complete and utter disaster for Joe Biden, and me sitting in my little cocoon with only the betting markets to look at could form no other opinion. I mean, 8 minutes in, he froze and
I didn't see
completely
that.
lost his train of thought.
I didn't see that for a while until you pointed it out to me, and I went looking for it, and I was watching it, and my immediate reaction was, bloody hell, the ref should have stopped the fight.
Yeah, towels flung in the air, Jack. It was a bit like that. And Trump really realised at that time that he had him covered, that he had it won. And or if he didn't have a victory, then certainly it was a critical loss for the Biden administration and for Joe himself. He looked old. He looked doddery. He looked incapable of taking Trump on. Trump lied his way through so many times. I mean, it's been fact-checked. I think it was something like a lie every minute and a half, something of that order.
Surprisingly, CNN were fact-checking the president as well. I'd never seen CNN fact-check Joe Biden before.
That fact-checking process, it's part of the debate is that you need, this is why we get to potential replacements for Biden. You need someone who's smart enough to pick up Trump when he lies and call him out. And when you get into this fact-checking stuff, and I had to do a little bit of it while I was watching the debate, Trump was saying, I'm the best president for veterans, for example. And clearly he hasn't been, because he made serious cuts to Medicaid. 60% of US military veterans rely on Medicaid for healthcare. So that was all a bit of nonsense, and that could have easily been picked up. But fact-checking is, we better just see what he's done. It'll take, it can't happen in real time.
No.
Anyway, a complete and utter disaster for Biden. They've rallied the wagons. They've circled the wagons around him. But it seems to me that they cannot proceed with him as a candidate. That's my view, that they cannot proceed with him as a candidate. So, firstly, that creates the problem of who's going to be the candidate.
Well, there's a problem before that.
Oh, well, there's lots of problems. There's problems everywhere.
No, well before you start looking at choosing a candidate, how do you get him out of the position? How do you get to the point where you can choose
him?
Yeah.
And let's presume,
because he's going to have to decide this. They can't force him out, I don't think.
No, he has to come to that conclusion himself. They can put all sorts of pressure on him, move big Barack Obama into the White House for a bit of a chat and all that sort of stuff. But in the end, he has to do it. But then there's a complication there too, Jack, because what if he says, well, I believe that I am, it's been, I believe that I am becoming too old to be the candidate, but I want to see this presidency out. That creates a potential for what amendment of the Constitution is it? The one about the capacity of the president. That would create issues around that.
I think it is. Yes, yeah.
That would create issues around that. And if we went...
No, see, but he hasn't got to do that. He can say that I think I'm fine to remain as president and I'm fine for the foreseeable future, but I don't think I can do 4 years. But you and I talked about this ages ago, and I said Obama needs to turn up and do the scene from the Godfather where Michael Corleone tells Tom Hagen, "You're not going to be the consigliere any longer."
Yeah,
and Tom's unhappy about it, but he has to accept
Vegas
it.
Matters, but he was still consigliere, but he just not. He had no credit for the Vegas move, so they're going to have to deal with that. I mentioned in my column that I
And
thought.
that means that they're going to have to deal with Kamala Harris as well.
That was my next point. So let's say they look at someone who really is quick on his feet and would take Trump to the cleaners in a debate. No doubt about that. But it's just because he's very, very good at it. And that's Gavin Newsom, the Californian governor. Now, we'll talk about all the problems, and we have, about having a California Democrat as been trying to win votes in the Midwest and Southwest, etc.
Even before we get to there, if he's the candidate, Kamala can't be the vice
Kamala
president.
has to be tapped as well.
Yes.
And so there's so much going on there. Then you get, okay, let's say that we've absolutely been able to clear the decks on all of those things, as difficult and complicated and messy as they could be. Then you've got Gavin Newsom, yes, younger, quick on his feet, bright, but he's a California Democrat, lieutenant governor, I should say, of California, and a former mayor of San Francisco. So a lot of that will be, look at these guys, weak on crime, liberals, crime out of control, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I said in my column that the term California Democrat is a term of derision held by Democrats in the Midwest. People on the left, let's say.
A lot of the rest of America is firmly wedded to the idea that just about everything silly in America came from California, and there's some truth in that.
Look, there might be a little bit of truth in that. I honestly think, as many risks as we pointed out in swapping over, and there are more, right? There are more than that. The status quo is just unacceptable. I cannot see how, unless my favourite comment of the day was after having watched the debate from someone on Twitter, I can't remember who it was, after having watched the debate, he said, bear with me now, but I think we should reintroduce ageism, which I thought was very funny. But I can't see the status quo being successful at all.
It's worse than that. In the immediate aftermath polling, 30% of people thought that Joe Biden won, right? And they are the rusted-on Democrats. They'll vote Democrat, hardcore, just like the MAGA people, the 30% of the Republican, 30% of the population on the other side. The trouble for trouble for the Democrats is that the other 15 or 20% who generally or mainly vote Democrat might not turn up, and if half of them don't turn up to vote, that not only will the Democrats lose the White House, they'll be get a shellacking in the reps and lose the
Congress,
Senate,
and
lose all of the Congress. So that's a problem. That's why he's got to go, and that's why I think he will be pushed out, because what's the old Neville Rand saying? When you're dealing with politicians, always back in self-interest, because at least it's the horse that's trying.
I think that was Jack Lang, mate. I'm pretty sure that was Jack Lang.
I'm pretty sure I've heard Neville use it, but he liked recycling.
Paul Keating. Paul Keating was the one who says every now and then they're erudite to their seats, and you got to get in there and kick them out.
But they'll be looking to survive, and that means that the internal party pressures will become overwhelming, and that's why I think he'll be pushed out. Yeah.
So.
And it needs to happen quickly, because
it can't happen any later than the convention, because
it needs to happen well before then.
Well, that's the cutoff point, because once we get into, and I think convention's 19, 20, 21 August in Chicago. Once we get a week later, it starts affecting the printing of ballot papers.
Even before that, there are problems with various states have various nomination proceedings, and some of those are running out of time even now. But I think that all those problems are probably fixable.
So how long have they got? 4 weeks?
Yeah. No, less than that, I think.
And like you, I think there's no other alternative
2 weeks,
for this.
2 weeks, maybe 3. And then he needs to do a Lyndon Johnson and make a speech and say, I will not accept. I will not nominate. I will not put my name forward, nor
And if
will I accept the
nominated, I
nomination.
will not stand.
Yeah.
And what was LBJ's comment at the time? He said, if you've lost, I think Walter Cronkite had been scathing about LBJ and the conduct of the Vietnam War. And he said, if you've lost Cronkite, you've lost America. And that's why he stood down. Yeah, got to happen. I know a lot of people are saying, well, no, it'll be all right. It's not going to be all right. And they need to act, as difficult as it's going to be.
And from Joe's point of view, Joe's actually behind. At the moment, he's losing the election. And he needed this debate. That's why he called it early, to turn things around. And rather than turn things around, he's just blown himself out of the water. So he's finished, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think he can win from here.
There's some discussion about the role of the media, Jack. Perhaps the media had failed in not reporting on Joe Biden's diminished capacity and the ravages of age. You showed me a clip, and I think this is well seen around the place, of him debating. I think it was 2019, wasn't it?
The Republicans are already running these clips. If you look at clips, they have a whole series of these clips, and you look at him in 2012, even 2019, and today, and the deterioration
it's quite marked.
It's quite marked, yes.
The only thing I'd say about that, Jack, is a lot of people have been, like when they post a clip on social media, sometimes very influential groups, and they'll slow the audio down and they'll make him look. So I mean, that's a get out for most journalists. I mean, anyone in the sort of press corps around the White House must have harboured some real doubts. I mean, look, I don't know whether it's worth quantifying, but I thought his performance was 10 times worse than I expected it to be. Yes, look, there's no doubt in my mind now that he's got to go. I think the first step is being able to convince the American people that he can continue to be president, and maybe there's a trade-off there when Kamala just might even get given the gig. I mean, if you've ever followed Veep with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, that's kind of what happened there. So maybe we're living the script of.
I don't think they're going to want to give Kamala the job, not even for 10 minutes.
She's got the California Democrat baggage, right? Just like Gavin does, but Gavin's just a smart operator. A lot smarter operator, a lot smarter on his feet. She was actually quite good, I thought, in the wake of the debate. She actually spoke better than I thought she would. But then, of course,
better than she ever has before, I would have put it.
Yeah.
But then that's a very low bar to get over.
Look, I think America is crying out for a younger face. It doesn't have to be, 25-year-old. In fact, it can't be. It's got to be someone who's 30 or older. But I think America is crying out for someone who's, 1, intelligent, 2, sort of vaguely trustworthy, and 3, capable. I think once that's done.
I think there are a number of capable candidates. Chicago pal of mine's very keen on their governor there, Pritzker, the guy from the family who owns the Hyatt hotels. And Newsom's polling he's within 5 points of Trump. And Trump's beatable for this reason is that everybody knows Trump and has an opinion on him already. Yeah. And a large part of the American population are never Trumpers. They wouldn't vote for him. As a friend of mine says, I'd rather vote for a potted plant than. And he says, and I may well be unless they can get Joe to move.
Yes. Yeah, I won't go to the next step on that line. Would be somewhere in the vegetable category.
Yes. Yeah, so that makes Trump beatable, and those polls of the Newsom v Trump polls are old now. They were late last year, early this year, but he was
deeply hypothetical.
but he was within 5 points. So if he's within 5 points on a hypothetical, that puts him close enough to be competitive. So that would be very hard to predict how it would go. But if it goes on the way it is, Trump will be president.
Oh, well, let's say that he is a warm favourite, and he deserves to be a warm favourite at this stage. The betting, which I said would mention the betting, and it was really interesting to see how the betting markets changed. Now, Trump went in from about $1.85, neck and neck with Joe. He was about 10 cents ahead of Joe. And he went into about $1.70. This is just during the debate. I haven't seen the futures since. While Biden blew out to $4.50, and I think it's in the 5s and 6s now. But this is during the debate, and I didn't catch Kamala's, but Newsom went in from 28 to 1 to 15 to 1. So the betting market was not so much framed about who's going to be the next president, but who's going to be the candidate who takes on Trump. That was what the markets were saying. All right.
Just one thing. I saw this on social media, but I'm getting it personally from people I know, from people who have had the experience of an elderly relative going through what Joe's going through. Not
I think
losing
you and
their
I
marbles
both
so
been
much.
there, haven't we?
Yeah. And there's a great deal of anger at Jill Biden because, as one commentator put it, one of the things we most fear is being taken advantage of and being abused when we're in the last days of our life. We hope that our spouse will protect us. Jill is not protecting Joe, and that's unimaginably cruel. And I'm getting that from right across the political spectrum.
Yeah,
People are very cross with
I
that.
don't buy that. I mean, a wife's going to stand by her husband. I mean, come on. That's just ridiculous stuff.
Yeah, no, there's a difference between standing by and allowing a farce to continue. I think that, and this is real anger.
It's not her job. It's not her job to say, Joe, what was Gareth Evans? What did Gareth Evans tell Hawke? They're pissing on your swag. It's not her job to do that. It's Barack Obama's. It's possibly Bill Clinton's. It's the South Carolinian chairman of the DNC. It's their jobs. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people would disagree with you. A lot of people think that's her job.
Oh, I don't think I think that's wrong. I think there's family and then there's politics, and the two things are pretty much separate. Jack, we're moving on from the US thing, but we've made our thoughts known. And anyone, by the way, who was clever enough to have a little investment, have a little wager on Gavin Newsom, well, at least you're getting value for money. If you got him at 33s early on, he's now into 15. So a good bet to have. But as I say, Trump definitely deserves his favouritism now. Now, Jack,
a lot of people are saying that a convention in Chicago would be a replay of 1968 and be very toxic, but I don't buy that. I think the convention would work just fine.
It's so clear, I think, to most people. Look, again, I was talking to a New England Democrat over the weekend, and his view was, well, you saved the country in 2020, Joe, and now you've got to save it again by stepping aside. That was the Democrat view, the New England Democrat view. All right, moving on. Jack, I sent a little text to a mate of mine. We have a bet, a traditional bet when Carlton play Richmond. He's a Tiger man, I'm a Blues man, so we have a lazy pineapple on the result, but we don't pass the money on. Whoever loses must pay $50 to the charity of the other's choice. So he wrote to me on text saying, what's your charity? And he should remember this because it's Médecins Sans Frontières, msf.com. I sent him the donation link and it was all done. All done by text, Jack. Then I went to my Instagram account a little bit later on and MSF was popping up everywhere on my feed. How does this happen, Jack?
This is because of the algorithms that they use, and they sell that data.
That was a private text between him and me. I hadn't. Oh well, I'd gone to. I pulled out the MSF. Yeah, I pulled out the MSF donation page
Yes.
and sent him the link. So there you go. And all of a sudden, I'm getting bombarded by MSF stuff. Guys, I already give you money, but this is algorithmic stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, as a commentator said this week, what happens is you buy a washing machine because the old one's on the blink, right? And then for the next 6 months, you get washing machine ads like you were trying to furnish a block of flats, And
I bought a pair of shoes for my wife a number of years ago. And for the next 2 years, if you looked at my web pages, you'd think I was a foot fetishist. I mean, there's just shoes just blowing up everywhere. Always women's shoes, not men's shoes. And that was, look, you can't buy anything on the web now without being absolutely hammered. And the stupidity of it is, as you say, once you've made the purchase of a particular thing, could be shoes, could be a donation to a charity, that they'll come back to you and say, go and buy some more shoes.
They leap to a conclusion that you are a regular shoe buyer because you bought one pair of shoes.
That's right. So this is why there are really serious issues around this, Jack, around data mining and the way the big telcos or the big tech companies like Google use the data that they've got from us. And when we're talking about, Jack, things as not too far into the future where billboards, outdoor advertising, will appear differently to you as it will to me based on our buying habits. So there's a lot of data mining. If the government did this, if the government was working on data mining and with a view to getting us to do one thing or another, people would be up in arms. But no one seems to care that data mining and data harvesting is occurring on a regular basis on the internet, and that our data is a long way from being secure and is being actively exploited by big tech to make us buy stuff that we don't really need.
Well, advertising's always done that. What did David Bird say? Maybe it's just me, but I think advertising was more fun when it was ruled by ulcerated 8-martini lunch Madison Avenue drunks, not autistic Google and Facebook coders with AI algorithms. I think there's something in that.
I have something there. What was the advertising show, Jack? Mad Men.
Mad Men, yeah.
And the lead character there,
Don Draper.
What?
Don Draper.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful interview between two ferns. Zach Galifianakis had Draper's. I'm just trying to think of the actor who played Draper on the Between Two Ferns. Very, very funny interviewing techniques and so forth. And he said, "Now Don Draper's suit is in the Smithsonian." And I can't think of his name, unfortunately, but the guy who plays Draper said, "Yes, it's a great honour." And Zach Galifianakis says, "What, next to the Cosby sweaters?" And the man who plays Draper is apparently a lovely bloke. He just couldn't keep it together for the next 5 or so minutes. He was completely gone. Very, very funny. D-Day, Jack. We're only a couple of days away now with a bit of time change, but we'll know the results by, I would expect, early on a Friday morning, Australian time. And the Tories, let me just tell you the betting. If you put 1,000 on Labor, you'll get $5 back. That's kind of where it is at the moment. Not exactly backable. at the moment. And on the line of betting, it goes Labor, Reform, and the Tories are on the third line of betting. So it looks like it'll be a complete wipeout. I was reading, I look at Sunak's seat, and Sunak's seat's actually a new seat, Jack, driven by an electoral redistribution. And it's pro-Brexit and those sorts of things. He picked up 70% in his old seat of Richmond, but now it's called Richmond and North something or other. And I reckon he's going to get rolled. I reckon he'll lose his seat, and that'll probably make him happy. It'll make it easier for him to go and live in Palo Alto. What other shocks are we in for, Jack?
Oh, who knows? It's going to be a debacle. It's going to be a debacle for the Tories.
And you popped in. I just wanted to have a bit of a chat because one of the things that really hasn't been discussed. I saw Farage talking about Brexit and saying, "Well, look, it was a good idea, but the Tories got it completely wrong, so it's their fault that they stuffed it up. It was a good idea, but it didn't go well." And this comes on top of, and certainly this is not something that anyone in the Labor Party wants to talk about either. But this is a Goldman Sachs report. Did you see this, Jack? No. Goldman post-Brexit, Britain has significantly underperformed other advanced economies since the 2016 EU referendum. This report was called "The Structural and Cyclical Costs of Brexit." The Wall Street Bank estimates that the UK economy grew 5% less over the past 8 years than other comparable countries. The true hit to the British economy could be anywhere between 4 to 8% of real gross domestic product, Jack. And yet it's not. And you can talk about Goldman Sachs and whether they're right or wrong, but it's a bit of a shocker, isn't it, that they're not even talking about it, other than to dismiss the Conservatives as being the architects of what was a good idea that turned into a disaster.
Do you say they're going back 8 years? What's the relevance of 8 years?
They've gone back pre-Brexit, but they are looking at the 2016 EU referendum. So that obviously that's a lot of stuff that occurred there, and it is very difficult to separate the cost of Brexit from other things. Of course, there was a pandemic. There was an energy crisis driven by the invasion of Ukraine. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
4 to 8%. What I can tell you, Jack, is that
there's a big gap between 2016 and when Brexit actually happened as well.
Yeah, true enough. But what I can tell you in hard data is that the UK's economy has grown 1.2% between 2010 and 2021. So that's the total GDP growth. That's not annualised. That's not indexed.
That's not necessarily Brexit related because the dates don't match up. I think there'll be arguments about this forever. It's done. It can't be undone now. I don't think.
I don't think it can. And it's a complete disaster.
I don't think. And given how Germany and France are going, maybe
Jack,
not.
Hang on, hard data. Full-year GDP growth in Germany averaged 1.23% growth per year from 1992 until 2023. France averaged 1.8% over the last 10 years. That's 1.8% per year for the last 10. Now, there's, big drops with a pandemic and then a big in all of those, on all three economies, and then a big uptick after the pandemic disappeared. So there's a lot going on there. But obviously, when you talk to or look at things like distillers in the UK, so the manufacturers of very fine scotch or gins, etc., they are getting absolutely smacked. They virtually can't get their stuff to market. I was looking at florists, Jack, or not florists, but the horticultural side of things. People who are growing flowers for sale in Europe, their life has just become a nightmare. because everything they do now has to go through HM Customs. So a bit of a disaster there that no one really is talking about. Farage probably said one of the honest things he's mentioned in recent times. He said, Brexit was really all about immigration. It wasn't about economics. Well, yeah, it was about economics. But you painted it as an immigration battle. Anyway, I went looking for this, Jack, because you've got 16-year-olds having a vote. Is that who's putting that forward?
Keir Starmer.
Oh, but yeah, it's a perennial, isn't it? And why not, Jack? What's the problem?
Why?
You can join up. You can go and fight in the army. You can go and join up in the army and get killed in battle at 16, 17, Jack.
No, you can't.
Yes, you can. You can be an organ donor, Jack, at 16.
That's about all you can do. You can't smoke, can't drink.
What Keir Starmer has talked about...
Can't sign a contract.
What Keir Starmer is really talking about is automatic voter registration. Now, the 16-year-old thing might be a bit of a nod to the youth of the UK, who've been copping the brunt of some of these these terrible economic figures. But they're talking about automatic voter registration actually increasing their participation at elections. So that was the thing there that we went through. But we must move on. 16-year-olds voting, I can't see a big problem there, but you can, Jack. I think if they're going to participate...
more to the point, I can't see a good reason why you would do it.
Well, I don't understand why you're opposed to democracy, Jack. You know, why 16-year-olds can't have a vote, 17-year-olds can't have a vote.
Well, why not make it 12? Why not make it 12?
System?
If it's okay at 16, why not at 12?
Well, why not indeed, Jack? I mean, I think, you know, I could make certainly a very good argument for 15-year-olds voting, but again, if it's not compulsory, what's the problem? You've got a little bit in here about the Atoll Islands vanishing. It came from a New York Times article where they looked at the Maldives, Jack, and there seemed to be, on my reading of that article, erosion from on one end of some of these atolls and islands in the Indian Ocean on one side, and then there was a rebuild up the other. And I suppose what's being said here is climate change actually taking away land mass for small islands in the world's oceans?
Well, it was a New York Times article, which rather surprised me to be saying this, but they're pretty much saying that the worries about climate change disappearing the atolls is not really panning out as the way they thought it was.
That's probably true, but here's a report from 2021 that involved the CSIRO, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Admin, University of Hawaii, whole collection of people, the World Meteorological Bureau, the Australian Bureau of Meteorology. And here's what they say, Jack. This is the South Pacific, right? So not the Indian Ocean. Over the last 60 years, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere measured at NOAA's Mauna Loa Observatory has increased by more than 100 parts per million to an annual average value of 414 parts per million in 2020. The combined impact of the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and halogenated compounds, mainly CFCs, in December 2020 is equivalent to a carbon concentration of 504 parts per million. Excuse me for being in the esoteric, listeners, but I'll go on. The Pacific Islands' mean temperature over land has increased by 1.1 degrees Celsius since 1951. Since the start of the satellite record in 1993, mean sea level has risen approximately 10 to 15 centimetres in much of the western tropical Pacific and approximately 5 to 10 centimetres in much of the central tropical Pacific. Rising mean sea levels have already resulted in increases in the frequency of minor flooding. Over the past few decades, mean sea surface temperatures across most of the Pacific has warmed by a few tenths of a degree per decade, with an overall warming of approximately 0.90 Celsius since 1982. I won't read all this. Over the period 1981 to 2018, subsurface oceanic heat content increased in most locations in the western warm pool region and in the northern and southern subtropics. Oceanic pH measurements since 1988 at Station Aloha near Hawaii showed that the ocean became 12% more acidic over this time. So we do have rising seas there, Jack.
Couldn't listen to all that. Are you saying the New York Times is wrong?
Well, if I'm going to look at the New York Times as opposed to the CSIRO, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, University of Hawaii, et cetera, compared to the New York Times, yeah.
Well, stick that link in their comment section, and we'll see what happens.
Well, they probably should have had a bit more of a look at it. I mean, the Maldives, Jack, I mean, it's a lovely place, no doubt, never been, but I'm sure it's very, very nice, and it's probably where New York Times readers go rather than Vanuatu or Tuvalu or the islands in the South Pacific, Jack. We've got to keep moving. We're running out of time. We've got so much to get through here. French election for the National Assembly, first round. The New Popular Front, Le Pen's party won 34% of the vote. The New Popular Front, People's Front of Judea, is the left-wing group there. They got 29%, and Mr. Macron's Together coalition got about 22% of the vote, according to various exit polls. But we know that Le Pen and her party have got about 34% in this first round. What happens next, Jack?
On the 7th, round 2, and these are all first-past-the-post constituencies, and you only get to stand in the second round if you've got more than 12.5% of the vote.
That's right.
And there's no compulsion to stand. So there's a whole lot of horse trading going on between the non-national rally, the non-Le Pen, the non-leader parties to work out who's going to pull out of various constituencies in the hope that they can prevent the national rally from getting a majority.
Am I right in thinking that the first round there are actually people don't vote for candidates, that they actually vote for a party?
No, they vote for candidates, I believe. Yes.
I don't think there are candidates are named.
Certainly in the MEP elections, they don't name the candidates. You vote for a slate.
The French system situation is highly uncertain and will remain fluid until the actual candidates running in the second round become clear, with up to half the seats. So I think what they're saying is that some of these candidates will be refined down depending on how they went.
Yes.
In the first round. Oh, I see. Okay.
And there will be horse trading. You give up in this seat, and we think we can hold out and get a slim majority on a two-person battle. Right? So
okay.
If you've got one candidate who got 30% and the other two who might have got 35%, and the other two have already got kind of 10 each or something, maybe you can cobble together a majority. So someone's got to give way.
Really, and we talked about this in previous episodes, Macron is just, the reason for calling that election didn't make any sense. I mean, he could have toughed it out. And really he's just using democracy as a bit of a plaything and to a point where he's going to get belted. I mean, you have to marvel at the lack of political skills in some of the world's leaders, don't you?
You do. One other thing we'd all benefit from is if we take the word far out of our political lexicon a little bit. If you read the press on the French election, the far left and the far right got 65% of the vote. And I don't believe that 65% of the French population are far anything. It's become shorthand for someone I disagree with must be far something.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we can safely call Le Pen's party a long way away from conservatism, Jack, on the ideological scale. And of course, the French, one of the most popular parties is the Socialist Party.
Yeah, well, everyone told me Giorgia Meloni was a far right person when she became Prime Minister of Italy, and I don't know. What are the trains running on time all of a sudden? Are they?
Well, you talked to a few journalists there, mate. They'll tell you some of them have been charged with criminal offences and these sorts of things. Certainly, the attack on the media from Meloni's party has been really, really poor. You might say they stood staunch with Ukraine for now and those sorts of things, but in domestic stuff, there have been journalist strikes and things like that, protesting about the treatment of journalists in Italy. That's never a good look. But we can't hang around on that because we've got to talk sport. And Swans had a little bit of a setback on the weekend. Jack just went a little bit too late. They've had this habit of slow starts and then belting sides in the second half, but they went a little bit late against a pretty good Fremantle. I think Fremantle are emerging as a good side.
Yeah, I don't think it's probably no bad thing for the Swans. They have been starting slow, and they were sooner or later going to get caught out doing that. I had a look at the coverage from Champion Data, who people all in Melbourne at least think they're the experts, and the team who's playing the best football over the last 5 or 6 weeks.
Brisbane.
Nope.
Fremantle.
Nope. Carlton.
Carlton. Oh, look, Carlton are going pretty well, mate. I don't think they've got too many problems. They've got the Giants this week, and the Giants have been sort of in a bit of a form slump, but they've got the Giants at home, and that will be a tough ask. I thought Richmond were very good against Carlton for 2 quarters. But Carlton kicked, Jack, the third quarter started with Carlton just 11 points in front. Richmond kicked the first goal. Carlton kicked an answering one a few moments later. And then there was about 3 minutes of general play, and then Carlton kicked 5 goals in 3 minutes and 56 seconds of play. It was quite astonishing to see.
There are a number of teams who are capable of putting on that quick burst like that, and they are the teams who are going well at the moment. And that is Sydney, Carlton, Brisbane, and who else? Oh, and Collingwood, I think, can do that.
Yeah, Collingwood do have that capacity to score quickly. I'm not sure that they've got their back half quite sorted out at the moment. Sydney, better for the loss. I've just got to marvel at Tom De Koning. They rested him, managed is the word they used. Patrick Cripps' form is just stunning at the moment. He had 10 in the first quarter, Jack. Then he had 2 in the second quarter, had 16 in the third quarter, including a goal and so many goal score involvements. He is looking like he'd be one of the favourites. I think he's on the second line of betting to win the Brownlow after the Bont, I think. Isaac Heaney, I should say, and then the Bont. But Patrick Cripps' form has just been stunning. He has brought in this ability to accelerate. He's never been quick and never will be, but he did sprint training in the off-season. So he's got that ability now to actually raise the gears and just explode away with a little bit of pace, and he's such a strong body that he's hard to pull down.
Did you watch the Origin?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I was quite surprised. Well, shocked at half time. I honestly thought, and I was talking to my good mate, my butcher friend Peter, and I said he gets up very, very early. I said, "What do you think? Queensland in front by 20 at half time, go to bed?" And he said, "Yeah, that's what he expected." Well, of course, New South Wales led. Was it 34 zip or 35 zip?
I think it's the biggest ever halftime lead.
It was, yeah. Quite astonishing. And there's a bit of bad blood there too, isn't there, between the two coaches? Billy Slater from Melbourne Storm, of course. They're obviously very upset at the treatment of their half in the first game where he got taken out, and things have not improved apparently. The Blues were set to do a media conference a media bit at the G before the game last week, the Maroons turned up 10 minutes late, I think, and they were furious at one another again. With Dean Ritchie, who writes, I think, for the telly still, saying it was a disgrace and it was an obvious tactic employed by the Maroons to be 10 minutes late.
There was nothing funnier on sport this week than watching the video of England fans who had left the Euro game against Slovenia before it was over, and they were videoed walking out. Slovakia, sorry. They were videoed walking out saying, look, I've had enough of this. They're playing shite and I want to beat the traffic. And then they were trying to get back in and couldn't get back in.
A bit late for that. What was the goal that put in front of the 95th minute mark, I think. So that was that. And there was some wonderful stuff for anyone who follows the soccer. The great Irish and Manchester United captain, he was standing with all his English mates, and they were watching this, and they've all exploded, and he just stood there with his arms, boys. He wasn't enjoying it at all. But what it does do deliciously, Jack, the win against Slovakia, means that England will have their hopes raised again, only to be dashed.
It's Spain, Germany, Portugal, France, England, Switzerland, and the last round of 16 game is tonight. I think it's the Dutch and Romania, the Dutch and the Romanians, and the winner of that will play the winner of Austria and Turkey.
Of course, when we talk about England playing the Swiss beat Italy, so they're in pretty good nick. France just going along with Mbappe. I don't know if you've seen, he's having to wear a protective mask on his face. He don't like it. They've been under a little bit and Germany look,
as always,
irrepressible. Yes, that sort of German efficiency, along with Spain, I think. It's Portugal are going okay too.
That's what I thought was so funny. These England fans leaving early to beat the traffic.
Because you're used to disappointment, Jack.
You're in a German city, and one thing you know for sure, there will be efficient, clean public transport to get you back to the hotel.
There's a wonderful doco on I think it's Netflix are screening it, and this is around I think 2021, the Euros there, where Italy ultimately beat England in a penalty shootout for the Euros. That was the final at Wembley, and the game was in the evening, but it's like 300,000 or 400,000 people had gathered in London. And basically just marauded around the streets in a sea of booze and cocaine. And they have all the crowd control people at Wembley, and they interviewed all the senior crowd control people, police and what have you. And they were all, like some of the mob got through. There was just such a big crowd. They knew they couldn't stop them. Some of them got through. It was pandemic stuff, so Wembley was only, I think, about 3/4 capacity, so a lot of these guys just snuck in. But the rest of them were waiting outside, and the crowd control guys were going, all we could do was just hope that England lost, and then they would disperse, because if they won, they'd just go straight through them. They're an excitable group of people, Jack. T20 final, India got the win. A little bit stiff, weren't they, the South Africans, Jack?
It was a terrible choke. They needed 30 off 30 with 6 wickets in hand.
It's a final, Jack. You know what the Saffers are like. They are going to squib it every time. There was a bit of a was a bit of a fortunate catch taken out in the boundary there, where the boundary rope had been moved out by about half a metre.
Yeah, look,
Fair catch, though.
30 off 30 with 6 wickets in hand. I reckon Rory McIlroy was watching it saying, well, it wasn't that bad.
For Greg Norman. Meanwhile, Jack, the Saffers flew out the following morning, and the Indian team and world cricket journalists are stuck in Barbados with Hurricane Beryl bearing down. Now, you'd think, and I have been there and can attest to the fact that Barbados would be a pretty good place to be stuck in. But it doesn't sound all that much fun in that Indian team members, journalists, etc.
Look,
were urged to go to the supermarket and buy their own water.
It'd be like a T8 here. You just go to the bar.
Well, that's what you'd expect to do. I did check Virat Kohli's Twitter feed. Gee, that's just a series of ads that he's on. He's not talking to anybody. He's just like, buy my stuff. He's got a clothing line. Nothing in black there for you, Jack, so you're disappointed. Some sort of youth clothing line that he's got on at the moment. So then I checked Rohit Sharma, and he hadn't checked in on Twitter since the final had ended. So I don't know. They're stuck in Barbados. Of course, Hurricane Beryl was smashed Grenada just in the last 24 hours. The capital there, Carriacou, they reckon it was just basically almost destroyed in the space of an hour. And Barbados has said that it is under a fair bit of water at the moment. And while this hurricane, level 5, is it? The grade 5 hurricane, makes its way across the southern or the Lesser Antilles, and then heads across, sort of passes Jamaica, and then heads off to the Yucatan Peninsula, where it'll cause even more mayhem as a tropical storm. So we wish the Indians well. If you're going to get caught in one place in the world, maybe with a bit of rain, a fair bit of wind, Barbados had still come up trumps. Jack, the worst over in first-class cricket, certainly English first-class cricket, is that and this pleased me so much I almost came to tears. Ollie Robinson has bowled a 43-run over with 3 no balls, and in the county stuff you lose 2 runs for a no ball these days. So they weren't over pitched or over the head or anything like that. My understanding was, watching the clip, that he just foot folded. Yeah. He basically overstepped 3 times. He's gone for 43. Leicestershire requiring 464 runs to win. Robinson had tidy figures of 1 for 22 from 12 before conceding 43 in his 13th over. That pleases me so much, Jack.
I was talking to some English friends, and I said, "Look, he's very talented, but is he serious? Is he a serious cricketer?" And they said, "Nah, not at all."
No. And he took on the role of being like the bad boy too against the Australians, and it was
very unconvincingly.
You actually got to be part of the 11 on a regular basis if you're going to do that, and you're not. Of course,
and you've got to be a little bit tough. I mean, and he's not.
Yeah. Oh, well, while we think of it, England plays the West Indies very, very soon in tests, a 3-test series, and that will be Jimmy's final hurrah, Jack.
One last test.
Oh, he's only playing the one. He's not playing the 3.
Yeah, no, he's
just the one.
Just the one at Lord's. I think that's it. Then he'll hang him up.
I noticed that he has been appointed as a mentor within the English squad, mentor for bowlers. A wonderful career, and he deserves all the
great bowler.
All the credit. Yeah, great bowler. I remember seeing him for the first time out here in Australian conditions, where he's never gone all that well, but there was something about him even then, and that would have been his first 2. And he was playing against guys like, he would have been playing against blokes like Adam Gilchrist and certainly Ricky Ponting, that era of Shane Warne, and he's gone through all of that. What's he, 42, 43?
Something like that. His record in Australia's not great. He had some good series in India, though, on the slow wickets over there,
Yeah.
and he's just a quality player.
Yeah, great artist of swing bowling. Now we talk about Ollie Robinson's 43, but we did find one that was worse, Jack, and that was a bit of a contrived event in New Zealand, Wellington versus Canterbury, where they brought on a bloke by the name of Bert Vince, who's gone for
77
off and over. He kept bowling no balls. But they were doing it deliberately, weren't they, to get Canterbury to make a decent total. And Lee German took 69 off that over.
Yeah, they were setting it up for a run chase, and I think they lost the game. So
they did lose ultimately.
It was a good tactic, but it went awry, as they sometimes do. Just before we leave sports, I've got nothing extra to tell you. No extra jokes today. The English fans provided that. But just before we leave sport, I was having a beer last night with a mate who grew up in Auckland, and he told me that Auckland beat the Auckland Blues beat the Waikato Chiefs in the Super Rugby final. And I said, I'd forgotten that was on. He said, so had everybody else. He says, only that I'm from Auckland and I follow the Blues. I had a look at it.
That speaks very loudly about how rugby union's going around the world, isn't it? Doesn't it? There's just not enough noise around. Certainly there is around a World Cup or a Six Nations now. Six Nations. There is a bit of noise around that, but the second level of rugby is not attracting a lot of attention. All right, well, that takes us out for the day for episode 78. There was a bit of a sledge there from CD, a listener CD, saying, "Look, Jack, Hong Kong Jack thinks he's left wing, but he's actually right wing." But I've left that alone. I wasn't going to include it.
I can cope with that.
But we do encourage our listeners to drop us a line. You can get hold of me on my Twitter account. DMs are open, and you can get hold of Jack if you want to call him a right wing ratbag. On his
Substack on hongkongjack.substack.com. Fire away.
There you go. Get stuck in. All right, listeners, thanks very much for your time. We hope we've entertained and informed, and we'll talk to you next week. See ya.